Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. And today I have a very interesting topic of conversation because I am joined by Lucien Windrich. Hello, Lucien.
Hello, Anna. How are you?
I'm very well. Now, as I often do, I have a peek at the program for the Astrological Lodge of London. And on it, I find very curious things like your talk, the golden section angles. So I thought it would be really good to have that discussion today. Um, Firstly, just to tell everyone that this talk is happening on the 5th of February. So I will be putting a link to that in the description box. But just so that people have an idea of what this is going to be about, it might be good to just tell everyone what the golden section angles are.
Okay. I think it's probably best I start with how I came into contact with them, which was in the early 90s. And I went to a workshop held by Theodore Landscheid, who's written quite a lot on golden section aspects, he called them, and I'll differentiate between aspects and golden section angles in a sec. And throughout the talk, I remember Claire Martin was there as well. And her and I afterwards left the talk thinking, we don't really know what they're about. And that was a whole day of workshop. And this is the tricky thing with these monsters, but they're wonderful monsters, is that they kind of consume you because you know the data is relevant, but yet you just can't get a handle on it. And I think I have a bit more of a handle on it now. So anyway, there was one graph that he put up, which was of the amount of rainfall that these researchers, what they were doing is they wanted to see if the amount of rainfall coincided with new moon and full moon phases. It was great. And when I say rainfall data, 30 years of data of heavy rainfall and least amount of rainfall, heavy rainfall. No, the researchers concluded there wasn't a correlation between new moon and full moon or any of the phases, so they dismissed it. Then Landscheid got hold of the data and said, hang on, if you look at the golden section points, there is a definite correlation. Okay. Now, what's interesting about that is that 3 days before the full moon and 3 days after, so first of all, 3 days after the full moon, you get the heaviest amount of rainfall, 3 to 4 days. 3 to 4 days before the full moon, you get the least amount. But that's measured from the new moon. So if you start the cycle, if you start measuring from the new moon, and you find the golden section point, which is, I'll explain in a minute, then you'll find that the point will extend past the halfway point, past 180 towards 225.5. So the most amount of rainfall occurred after the full moon, three or 4 days after that, at 225 degrees, yeah? It's kind of like a tidal wave. You imagine when the wave is trying to get to full and then it all comes crashing down. And then the least amount was the 3 or 4 days before full. Now, the very important thing, just to finish this little bit off, is that you cannot only measure from the new moon. If you do apply the same measurement from the full moon, then you get the most amount of rainfall just past the new moon again. Because you're starting from the full moon to full moon. Imagine they're 2 cycles mirroring each other. Okay, so now, Anna, this is the important bit now. All aspects in astrology have a midpoint. In fact, most aspects are generated from midpoints, in fact, pretty much. You can divide the circle in half, in quarters. All the aspects are generated from midpoints. All aspects have a midpoint. And on either side of the midpoint are the phi angles, equidistant, symmetrical, on either side of the midpoint of every single aspect. Now, there are, to answer your question, there are not aspects simply because the golden ratio itself is an irrational number and functions like a vortex. So rather than reflect back, it swallows up all the energy. So it stops it kills frequencies at that point, on those two extreme points, and so forth.
Well, that's fascinating. And I can see why you and Claire Martin initially thought, there's something here, but I don't quite know yet what it is. Because it is one of those things where you can kind of feel that there's something going on.
So I've given you a bit of technical information, but really I'm an astrologer. I want to know what it means. Otherwise, I'm not going to use it. I asked Landscheid at the workshop, and he kind of just said, well, there's a lot of stability in it. And I went, well, stability, what do you mean? And what he was referring to, he wasn't thinking like an astrologer now. He was thinking like an astronomer, because he did a lot of work on NASA. He worked with NASA, in fact, on solar cycles. Anyway, and he was thinking that, and this is true, that all the planets are phi spaced. When I say phi, I mean golden section, or phi. All the planets are phi spaced. Can I show you a diagram?
Yes.
Can you see this? Can you see this diagram? All the planets are phi spaced. Can you see that? First of all, can you see all the concentric rings?
Yes.
Each one of those rings is spaced according to 1 or 1.618 and so forth, all the way in. And then if you start with Eris right at the bottom and then move across 90 degrees to where Pluto is, then you'll find Pluto on that concentric ring. Then you move, the spiral goes in again, and you'll find the next one, Neptune, on that concentric ring. And then you'll find Uranus, and so all the way in, right all the way into Mercury. So what he was saying, Theodore Landscheid, although I wished he had shown me this diagram, was that the Fibonacci spiral constrains and limits all of the planets to these orbits, which is a huge thing to come up with.
So I guess the immediate question I have is, are we saying that the way in which the planets are arranged in our solar system has naturally followed a Fibonacci pattern?
Absolutely.
As you would find in many flowers and all over nature.
Absolutely.
But that's staggering.
That is gobsmacking.
Because we always think of the gravitational pull of the sun being what orders everything, and other forces. It never occurred to us, well, it never occurred to many of us, that there could be the same principles applying with Fibonacci numbers in space as they are here on Earth.
Absolutely. It's remarkable. It's astounding. I know that, carry on.
It makes you think about as above, so below in a very different way.
Totally.
Wow.
Totally. So just to finish off, was that mathematicians and astronomers who are sticklers for exactitude and accuracy will criticize what I've just said, but what they will criticize it on is the fact that the spacings aren't exact. Now, this brings in a whole nother dimension that I have to bring in, which is the spectrum of Fibonacci ratios. I'm not going to go into it now, but they're on a spectrum. And once you understand that all these ratios are on a spectrum from half the oppositions to squares, to all, they're nested within each other. They're larger and smaller spirals within each other. Then you realize that nature is comfortable using certain spirals at that scale, and at the solar system scale, it uses a slightly different scale or numbers, an approximate. That's all it is. It's just on a spectrum.
Well, it makes sense that it would be on a different scale when you consider that the size of things, and the distance of things. So it would be on a different scale. But it's just made me think about also those ancient astrologers who had everything in circles as well. They were far off and not far off.
You know what, you're right. It's so profound, this, and it really, I need to write it up, and people need to debate this, because it needs to be discussed in great depth. But I don't know how much you want me to carry on with that kind of stuff. There's so much I don't really want to focus on that. That's astronomy, and that's wonderful, but it's the astrology that I really want to talk about.
Yes, my mind is still catching up with that.
Yes. Yeah.
What? Wow, really? You had my attention on the weather, and then so folks, you want to learn more, you have to attend this talk.
Yeah.
So
yes.
How does this fit into our astrology then?
Well, so I'm going to use someone like the Queen's chart, because that is such a great example of what I'm trying to illustrate. If you remember her chart, she has a T-square with Saturn up on the midheaven, and Jupiter and Neptune in that T-square. Now, you would have thought that someone like the Queen would at least have her sun placed somewhere significantly. I mean, the sun is the significator for royalty and kings and queens and so forth. And she has a moon in Leo, so the sun again becomes important. But the sun doesn't figure at all in that T-square or in her chart, other than the fact that it's first degree Taurus, which fine. So she's dutiful, she's a disciplinarian, she deals with all of her stuff really well and thoroughly. But the sun doesn't connect with the other aspects of a chart except via these golden angles. Now, if on a larger scale, if the planets are being held by the spiral of the Fibonacci spiral, then if the Queen's sun is holding those aspects in that same way, then that makes a lot more sense. Suddenly you see that she has this wider perspective, limiting and constraining and holding all of this stuff in her chart. But the sun, her sun itself is not, it sounds strange, but it's a muted sun, because it's on a point that is constrained and limited. But the sun is the orchestrator of everything else in the chart via this golden spiral.
I was just thinking, listening to you, that the ideal role of the monarch is not to be center stage. A good monarch is not center stage, because it's not about them. Absolutely. It is about people whom they serve.
Absolutely.
And that really is the hallmark of a good monarch, if we're to have one at all.
Mm-hmm.
So would make sense in her case because, at least outwardly,
Mm,
her public persona was one of service.
completely.
And whatever, I appreciate that not everyone will agree with that interpretation of her time, but that is the persona that she chose to put forward. However successfully that might have been, we, might be up for debate. But that is what she appeared to take pride in. The fact that
Absolutely.
she was there to be of service to her people. And I think on the whole, the public responded well to that. So, so what you're saying now makes more sense.
You see, if her son was involved in the T square in a normal way, let's say it was opposite Saturn, then the son has to be involved in the whole drama of the Saturn up in the with the public. But with the sun on the golden angle, it's muted. She can assume a muted position for her son and completely give everything else to out there to the public. But the thing is, it'd be fascinating to see if someone else, and this is where the research comes in, if someone else has their son at that point also picking up aspects of their child and seeing how it works for them. But my guess is that for most people, we couldn't handle it. We could not handle our son being that muted. Do you understand why I say the sun is in a muted?
Yes, I do understand.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering though whether that would be, because again, if we come back to the Queen, she did not choose this.
No.
She was born into this position.
Yeah.
And in fact, her father did not, it wasn't even born into the position. It happened.
Mm.
It happened. So there's an element of fate or destiny. So I'm just wondering, the other possibility would be that it would indicate a person who was born to be into a role of service for others in some way.
Completely. Very much so. What's interesting about her chart as well is that the sun is not only at the 5 point of the T square, it's also at the 5 point of her Venus trine Pluto. So to have that same sun service the public and all the ministers and international Commonwealth countries, Jupiter and Neptune, and all of that stuff. But at the same time, she has Venus and Pluto in a trine, and the sun is on that point as well. So she's servicing all of her relationships on some level as well, which is, and again, she has to take a back step, a back seat, if you like. But of course she isn't, she's the Queen, but there's a real paradox here. But what's that I found really, really interesting about the golden ratio, because also what the golden ratio is, or the divine, it's often known as the divine proportion. So there's a sense of needing to understand and have a sense of proportion. Now, proportion isn't a harmony and balance. Proportion means you have to see how things fit in with the elements with each other and also with the greater whole, which is a much harder task, and or in your surroundings or in your context. It's much more difficult. Yeah.
It's about perspective, isn't it?
It's about perspective.
Yeah, it's keeping everything in perspective.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
and I think that's the, and I was just thinking about this issue of stability, and I'm sure that from an astronomical perspective, that there is a specific definition of stability, perhaps. But I'm just wondering whether really we're talking about the need to achieve balance, and because that's a way, that's another way of saying achieving perspective, is it's to have a balanced sense of things.
But again, whenever you say balanced, you're usually thinking like a seesaw.
True.
Like oppositions or reconciliations and so forth. But proportion is different. It's a tricky one, actually. Proportion, I wrote something here. It is, yeah, don't know where it is now, but proportion, because in art, you can make something, you have to be able to prioritize certain issues. Something can be in the background, something be in the foreground, which is exactly what the spiral does. The spiral goes smaller and bigger. And yet, oh, this is the important point about it, actually, about the Fibonacci spiral and the logarithmic spiral, is that the angle never changes, that it just gets smaller or bigger, but the angle is the same. So you get the same perspective, but it's scaled up or down. Now, that's quite remarkable as a principle to work with. How can you see from the Queen is a great example of this. She will talk to ministers from all over the world, and I would imagine she pretty much discusses that with Charles and everybody exactly the same. I don't see it being any different. It's an equiangular approach, it's called.
Yes, I think that's what I was thinking when I was word balance. That was my idea, was of just that keeping everything in perspective and not allowing the extremes either side. It just keeps everything even. So actually the better word would have been equilibrium.
Exactly, an equilibrium, or
hold that equilibrium, because what I was thinking was about nature and the whole thing about everything wanting to be homeostatic, you know, to keep that. And then I was thinking about music. When you started talking about art, I was thinking about music and the need to keep the harmony as well. So I just wonder to what extent those ancient astrologers were aware of this. Was there something going on? Because they certainly all were aware of the golden ratio and, you know, everything else that was going along with that. And whether that had to do with the music of the spheres as well, that they were so keen on.
It's hard to know. You'd have to study it in depth. It's hard to know what actually they did know. You know, clearly Pythagoras was aware of it. I think, yeah, I'm assuming he was. You know, the musical scale. What's important about the musical scale, you have your 12 notes like you have your 12 signs of the zodiac. But why the 12 notes? Now, Richard Merrick, who I've been reading up a lot on interferencetheory.com, explains how the Fibonacci ratio, so the 8-13 ratio, limits the amount of harmonics that can resonate freely in a system. Beyond 13, the harmonics, to us, we wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And it seems like life seems to make it simple for us. It provides us with these basic harmonics and frequencies. And that beyond that, maybe other animals, maybe other life forms can tap into, possibly. But for us, that's our narrow spectrum.
That's our sphere.
That's our sphere, yeah.
Our sphere.
That's remarkable, again.
Wow.
It's in music, you know, it's enshrined in the musical frequencies. And if it's enshrined in the musical frequencies, then it's in the music of the spheres, definitely.
There is so much that we have yet to understand about frequency. We are in our infancy where frequency is concerned. and you just in terms of sound as healing, and the power of humming, the power of sound, the power of humming, the frequency of letters, because letters are sounds before they become letters, and how they relate to the sacred, and on it goes, on it goes. It seems to me that we knew a lot more that we forgot, dismissed, and are rediscovering now and adding to what was once known. But we have a long way to go. And I think what you are discussing in this fascinating talk is just, it's another amazing layer to add to this, which of course what makes it so wonderful is that we just ask more questions. We have
True. It's true. I was thinking that. I thought, I'm not too sure if I'm going to be able to share all of this stuff. It's huge. It's a lot of stuff to take on. And therefore, I keep saying I just want to focus on the astrology part of it, because if I bring in too many other elements, I'm going to get lost myself.
Exactly. Yeah, because well, that's what makes it such a good subject, because a good subject informs, but leaves you asking lots more questions, because it's leading you to on a quest for understanding.
But I'm a firm believer, Anna, in that things are simple. Well, if they can be explained by a simple theory that explains a lot of things is good, rather than a complex theory that only explains very little. So this is a simple theory where it's just saying at every aspect, no matter what the aspect is, find the midpoint, and besides the midpoint are the 5 points, constraining and limiting how resonant that aspect can be. If it didn't, everything would be too chaotic.
Exactly. Do you know, I was thinking exactly of that word, chaos. What it does is it's orderly. And I think
exactly
one of the reasons why our eyes appreciate certain types of architecture that conform to the golden ratio is because it's simple and our eyes enjoy it. There's a harmony, a balance, there's a symmetry. All of these things are things that we appreciate. And that's because it's orderly. We can comprehend it. It's orderly. Everything else becomes chaotic. And we drop those rules in architecture at our peril. For our own health, it is not good to see these carbuncles going up all over the place in brutal style. It does nothing for the human soul, the human spirit. It actually oppresses and depresses. Whereas buildings that applied the ancient measurements, which were based in nature, are much better for us. And it's the same with music. It's the same thing with music. So it's the same thing with everything. So to actually see it happening in the heavens, again, it just makes me think of that as above, so below in a whole different way.
I mean, Anna, I can't believe that something so simple hasn't been taught to us. Why not? What happened? And I think what happened was, sadly, it was the scientific, the age of enlightenment and the rational era that came in that emphasized and said that you have to be accurate. But no, the same principle can happen on a scale, on a spectrum. That's the difference. It can still exist on the spectrum. You don't have to be accurate. So, for example, you know, when I was talking about the Queen's chart and the T-square, that and her sun is at the 5 point of the T-square. But now the different degrees of that T-square, you know, some of them are 3 or 4 degrees away. But if you take the mean of all of those positions, the mean average of those degrees, it comes back to exactly, the sun is even more exact on that point, on the mean of all those points, not just 1 or 2 or 3. Nature uses the whole lot and takes an average.
I think there is this fetish for precision, which can limit us. We need to understand that most things do not operate on this extremely tight,
precisely,
rope, if I can put it like that. Most things exist in a kind of blurry, fuzzy, and we talk about spectrum now a lot more than we used to. We understand that people are on different spectrums, and we can do that. And you know, even simple things like orbs. If we come back to astrology and we talk about orbs, traditional astrologers sometimes use orbs that make me go, really? And yet I think about it, and they're right. And even discussions like, when does a transit begin? Does it begin? Do we have to wait exactly until the moment or the days or the weeks where the two planets are at that same degree? Or can we talk about it as a phase? You know, I'm going through a Saturn phase that's going to last me 3 years now at the moment, because it's transiting one planet and another and another and another. That's a Saturn phase. Okay, it's more intense when it hits that particular degree.
No, I agree.
Do I feel Saturn all through this period? Yeah, I'd say I do. And I think that's what we need to think about, particularly when we're considering space, where distances are vast. We must have to adjust our ideas about let's call it the orbs that are applicable.
Yes, I know. He used 15-degree orbs. What was his name? Cosmos and Psyche. Richard Tarnas. I mean, he used 15-degree orbs for Uranus and Pluto, which, to me, 15 degrees, you're going into another aspect. 15 degrees is an aspect in its own right. So, yes, I hear what you're saying, but there are boundaries. Yeah.
There are boundaries, because in this case, the definitions change a little bit. But nevertheless, what we're saying is we need to be aware that things are not always as clear cut.
No, absolutely.
As we think. And that there are times when we need to have a little bit of leeway, which is what you're discovering. So thank you, Lucien, for sharing this very exciting subject with us, because there's so much for us to explore. And on that note, I'll be putting a link to the Astrological Lodge of London in the description box, so that everyone can race and and join your talk on the day, because I'm sure there's so much revealed.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I enjoyed that. That was really wonderful. Thank you.
And if people want to find out more about your work, Lucien, what do they do?
Well, at the moment, I need to write everything up and have it published, you know. So at the moment, there isn't anything published yet.
Do you have a website that people can visit?
No.
Okay, fine. The Astrological Lodge of London, the 5th of February, is your opportunity then.
Okay.
To meet Lucien and to find out more about what he's doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. Have a lovely day. Lovely evening. Bye-bye.
And thank you all for watching. Now, that link to the Astrological Lodge of London is also important if you want to join the Karmic Astrology Seminar that's happening in April, featuring Stephen Forrest, myself, Wanda Seller, other wonderful astrologers. Do check it out. Until next time, goodbye.